the 13th Amendment allowed people who were incarcerated to no longer be treated. They allowed the people who were incarcerated to be treated as slaves. And once you became incarcerated, you were no longer a full citizen. And we've got to try to break through that, because that has been one of the primary uses during the Jim Crow era of making sure that African Americans were no longer voting. So they would arrest people for loitering when they were just walking down the street, or they would arrest someone for shoplifting or some made up charge often. But they would once they arrested them, they no longer could vote. They no longer had the ability to act as a citizen, and that was an intentional thing that took place. So this is trying to address that particular aspect of the 13th Amendment.
Absolutely. And does that mean that this would close a loophole for essentially forced prison labor, or is that part of the issue too?
That's part of the issue as well, and that's another one of the bills that I think I've signed on to. I think it's SJR 10 or something like that. So.
All right, and
that one actually not only speaks to the national, but also the state constitution, SJR 10, as I recall.
Okay. I actually haven't had time to look that one up. Yeah, I'll look that up though. So tell me more about that. It basically yeah.
Well, we're dealing with the recognition that, first of all, we have a prison pipeline that has been developed, where there's an incredible number of a much higher percentage of folks who are African American and Latino and Native American who end up in the state prisons and in other prisons, incarcerated in some form at a much higher percentage for the same violations than whites as well. So we're looking at that as a concern. And when they are incarcerated, they are nationally, as well as frankly within the state, they end up having certain labor that they are not really paid for. So we're trying to address those particular issues as well.
Why are the issues of amending the 13th Amendment and the forced prison labor issue that you mentioned, why are those important? And do you think there's political will on the national stage for amending the 13th Amendment?
I think there's political will now. I think people have, as a result of the murder of George Floyd, people have recognized that the concerns about the 13th Amendment and the other things have been there for a long time, but people dismiss them as just simply someone exaggerating what the real issues are. We now know that those issues are no longer exaggerated. They were in fact concerns that needed to be addressed. We're starting to address them. I think we have some political momentum to get some of those things done on a number of levels, not just this, but also in education and housing and healthcare, in economic development. All of those things are starting to come forward as things we need to address, because the recognition is that we actually have significant holes in our safety net that are specific to racial prejudice.
Absolutely. And I understand some of the bills you are sponsoring are related to reparations, and at the request of former Representative Mitchell, I saw one bill mentions a study for reparations on the state level. Another is, again, urging Congress to enact legislation. But SB 619 says in the summary, it directs Department of Revenue to actually establish a program to pay reparations to Black Oregonians that submit an application and who can demonstrate heritage in slavery. If SB 619 were to pass on its own, would that get the ball rolling for Black Oregonians potentially receiving reparations from the state of Oregon? Or is the bill kind of...
It would get the ball rolling. I'm not sure. We need to study this. We need to understand what's going on. Let me put it another way. We have had a number of attempts to try to deal with this particular issue. Other ethnic groups have seen reparations come to them because of things that were done. Others have not. I mean, the Native Americans have not certainly seen that, but the African American folks who are, I think, arguably helped build this country in terms of slave labor, have not been able to get really the recognition or the financial support so that they can actually start things at a level playing field. So this is an attempt to try to deal with that. It is also an attempt to say it's about time you start talking about it, because for many folks, they would not want to talk about that. They would try to distract with other issues. This is a time to actually talk about it and say, is this something we can do? Should it be done? What would it look like? How much would it involve? And we are talking about an annuity. We'll be changing some of the language in that. But we're talking about an annuity that can be relied on by different folks in Oregon. Oregon's history regarding African Americans, you probably know, but the Constitution and the redlining and the Vanport situation and the systematic efforts to disrupt and move African Americans out of certain areas of Portland and other places is a history we need to acknowledge and then do something about. Not just talk about it, not just give a quick rhetorical flair and say that this was terrible, but do something about it. Don't just sit around and say, oh, isn't that terrible? There's nothing we can do about it. Well, we can. We can actually do something about it, and reparations is one of those possibilities.
Absolutely. And could the state of Oregon on its own kind of establish these funds for Black Oregonians, descendants of slaves, even if there was no federal litigation on the federal level?
Well, we aren't sure how much money we're talking about, but it would cost the state of Oregon some significant money. We know that that's the case. Now, has it cost the African American communities significant amounts of money? Yes. And so how do we balance those situations? That's the question. That's what the study is about. That's what the other ideas are about.
And I'm curious about some of these ideas have been introduced to the state Congress in the years past, right? And
well, not really. The bills related to the 13th Amendment and slavery have been introduced in the past. The reparations bill, I don't recall a reparations bill being introduced in the past, but that's something. Now, I have introduced a number of bills that relate to education, that relate to training, that relate to hiring minority teachers, curriculum, looking at bills that relate I've continued to introduce bills that concern the public safety issues and police accountability, excessive use of force. All of those things have been introduced in the past, and dealing with housing. I mean, we had to deal with the fact that a number of the covenants for homes in Oregon say specifically that you cannot sell that house to an African American, or cannot sell that house to someone who is non-white. I mean, we managed to break through that particular bill, and in fact, we didn't officially really take the part of the Constitution that did not allow non-whites to live and spend more than 24 hours in one place in the state. We did not take that really officially out of the Constitution until the early 2000s, when the vote came in and a third of Oregonians voted to keep it in. So we still are dealing with a number of issues like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you think these racial justice bills in general, do you think there's more political will for them on the state level than in years past because of the racial reckoning that happened in 2020 and everything?
I think that's exactly right. I think we have seen a sense that that people have understood that the issues were not imaginary. The issues were in fact real for their Black neighbors, for their Latinx neighbors, for their Native American, and for their Asian neighbors. These are not things that people made up. They began to understand that this is a real issue, and if we want to have an Oregon that is available and acceptable for all of our people, then we need to make sure that we're supporting them in a good way.
Absolutely. And is there any that are like the most urgent bills or issues, or are they all pretty much equally as urgent?
Oh my! I think that they all have a reason for it. If you get a chance, I would encourage you to take a look at the BIPOC, BIPOC, the BIPOC caucus bills. We had a news conference several weeks ago that I detailed 10 basic areas that we want to see how things happen. What has also happened in the Oregon legislature, though, that is important, is that when I started in the Oregon House, I was the only African American in the Oregon House. Jackie Winters was the only African American in the Oregon Senate. There are now 12 people of color who are elected officials in the Oregon House and in the Oregon Senate. We have that many folks in the Capitol, 12 folks in the Oregon Capitol. That means we're actually starting to look at the issues of those communities in a way that we were not able to do before, because those people hold they're the chairs of committees. They are bringing forward bills. They are discussing issues among their colleagues. And so we're starting to see some things. So if you take a look at that list of the BIPOC caucus priorities, you can find that, I think, pretty easily. You will see that we are looking at a number of issues, everything from housing to education to healthcare to some simple things like voting issues and how we support that. So we are going to be doing some things, and I think that's there because we've been able to make the case that we've got to make some changes.
And are there bills in the works already for those issues you mentioned? Those other things besides what we talked about?
If you take a look and list those, if you take a look at that list, and it's a long list. I mean, I can't say that all of my bills deal with the BIPOC caucus, but all of my bills come forward because of my perspective, or because of the perspective of constituents who think that something should be done to change some things. And that's the case with a number of things. I have 55 bills that I've introduced. They are not all necessarily officially BIPOC caucus bills by any means, but they all have, they again provide my perspective. And if you look at the bills of Janelle Bynum or Mark Meek or a number of the other folks, Confam, you will find those folks are all putting forward bills that deal with solving some of the problems in their communities.